This week, Britney Spears could gain a massive boost in her fight against her conservatorship. That's the legal arrangement of authority over her since 2006. It was petitioned by her dad, who had cited concerns about her mental health. So last month, a judge denied Spears' emotional plea to release her father from his role as sole conservator. Spears said she feels enslaved by his demands, that her conservators have denied her basic freedoms of choice, and that the court-appointed lawyer representing her has made her ignorant about her options. Today, the New York Times is reporting that a former federal prosecutor will begin the process on Wednesday of taking over her legal fight to end the arrangement. From that New Times reporting, quote, in recent days, Spears began having discussions with Matthew Rosengart. He's a former federal prosecutor who has represented several celebrities in recent years, about having him and his firm take over and push for an end to the conservatorship. That's according to a person briefed on the matter. If allowed by the court, Spears' retaining of Mr. Rosengart would signal a drastic change in the handling of the case. Joining us now, former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance and Mike Schmidt, New York Times Washington correspondent, who's bylined on that new reporting. Lucky for us, both MSNBC contributors. So, Mike Schmidt, talk about, well, two things. One, who and what kind of lawyers have been representing her, and how drastic of a shift is it to have someone who's a former federal prosecutor step in and take over her fight to end her conservatorship?
So there's a feeling from the Spears side that she has not had an aggressive lawyer, a lawyer that came from a top-tier firm that could use all of the resources of that firm to aggressively represent her in trying to get out of the conservatorship. And what she is seeking basically a high-end, criminal defense lawyer, a lawyer that has a range of experience, a lawyer who has done litigation, a lawyer who has represented celebrities, and a lawyer who is willing to take on the other side. Her father's side is represented by another prominent firm. And this is a huge legal fight with a lot of money on the line, obviously a lot of questions about freedom and choice and someone's ability to make their own decisions about their own lives. And that's what brought her to reach out to Matthew Rosengart. He's based in California. He's someone that has represented people like Steven Spielberg or Julia Louis-Dreyfus. And he's someone that has represented companies, and he's someone that worked in the Justice Department. So that is where she finds herself as she tries to position for a much more aggressive posture in this fight.
Joyce Vance, I've watched a little bit. I've seen the New York Times documentary on the Save Britney movement. Since I saw that, I've read most of the articles about how this happened. But one thing I learned is that the conservatorships don't end. Sometimes they're used for people sort of at end-of-life issues. I mean, what are the odds of success, even with a finer, more skilled, more aggressive former federal prosecutor as her attorney?
Her chances of getting out from under the conservatorship or modifying its terms are much greater if she has a lawyer who's representing her interests. Up to this point in time, she hasn't been permitted to pick her own lawyer. She told the judge in this most recent hearing that she didn't even know she had the right to ask for a termination of the conservatorship. So fast forward to a moment where she's able to pick a lawyer of her own, someone who Mike's reporting suggests is principled, is decent, but will vigorously represent his clients. And that entire landscape shifts to an area where Spears can have a fair chance at getting her story heard by the court. And Nicole, I'd make one last point here. It's appropriate to use a lawyer who has expertise in criminal law because it's so difficult for people to get out from conservatorship. They almost have to prove not their innocence in a criminal sense, but their innocence in the sense that they're no longer living with the conditions that led to the conservatorship in the first place. Really, the individual who lands in this situation is very much behind the eight ball. They are matters of state law, and California's procedures are very opaque. So bringing a good lawyer to the table equalizes the playing field for her.
So, Mike, again, I'm not a whiz in any of these issues, but one of the things I've learned from brushing up is that she's got the conservatorship required her to take birth control, requires her to work. Does this new lawyer plan to countersue? I mean, will his move seek to perhaps criminalize her treatment under the conservatorship?
I think that my sense from this is that all the options are on the table in terms of how aggressive they're going to be. They're going to seek to end the conservatorship. They're going to seek to raise questions about Spears's father. What was his fitness? How was it that he got to choose and had got to have such a role and such a prominence in this? And why was it that power was given to him by the court? And how did that happen? And were her rights, her due process rights, her basic fundamental rights under the Constitution, were they violated by this? So there's a range of things that they're going to look at as they begin this new aggressive posture.